He was the son of Rome's greatest philosopher-king, trained to rule with wisdom and justice. But instead he craved blood, glory, and the roar of the crowd. From the palace to the gladiator arena, Commodus turned the empire into his personal playground of fear. How did the boy who could have been a wise emperor become Rome's most dangerous spectacle? Watch as we uncover the rise, cruelty, and shocking downfall of the Gladiator Emperor. In the heart of Rome, under the towering marble columns of the imperial palace, a boy was born who would one day shake the foundations of the empire. Commodus, the son of Marcus Aurelius, entered the world with the weight of destiny pressing on his tiny shoulders. His father, a philosopher-king celebrated for his wisdom and discipline, nurtured his son with care, hoping the young boy would inherit not just the throne, but the virtues of justice, temperance, and intellect. Commodus grew up in a world of luxury, but one that demanded constant vigilance. Tutors filled his days with lessons in Latin, Greek, and rhetoric, but also in law, strategy, and the responsibilities of leadership. From an early age, he accompanied his father on military campaigns, observing the delicate balance between mercy and authority. Rome's citizens adored Marcus Aurelius for his fair rule and deep thought. They expected the same from his heir. Yet even as a child, Commodus displayed a restless spirit. He was charming, often delighting guests with clever words and quick wit, but behind his smiles there was a hunger for attention that could not be sated by books or praise. The emperor Marcus Aurelius, ever patient, recognized both promise and danger in his son. He knew that power could corrupt even the most brilliant mind if left unchecked. Commodus's mother, Domitia Lucilla, often whispered prayers for the boy, fearful of the temptations that surrounded the imperial palace. By the time he reached adolescence, Commodus had begun to show signs of the man he would become. His body was strong, his mind sharp, and his ambitions undeniable. Servants and soldiers alike spoke of his skill with the sword and the bow, marveling at the grace of his movements. Yet within him, a darker curiosity began to stir, a fascination with the blood and spectacle that made Rome gasp and cheer. As the years passed, Commodus's father sought to guide him, reminding him that the throne was not a prize but a responsibility. He told stories of past emperors, both great and fallen, stressing that Rome was a living entity, fragile yet mighty, and that its survival depended on wisdom, not cruelty. But Commodus, eager for recognition and craving the spotlight, was beginning to imagine a different future, a future where he himself would be the center of attention, feared and revered, not just respected. The stage was set. The young prince, trained in philosophy, military strategy, and the art of ruling, was about to inherit more than a crown. He would inherit the expectations of a city, a legacy of intellect, and the dangerous allure of absolute power. And yet, behind the marble walls of the palace, the seeds of ambition and of destruction had quietly begun to grow. Commodus entered his teenage years as a figure of fascination in Rome. The city buzzed with whispers of the emperor's son, a boy who could wield a sword like a seasoned soldier and recite poetry with the grace of a scholar. The Senate watched, with cautious hope, hoping that the young heir would carry forward his father's philosophy of governance. Commodus, however, was not content to simply follow in his father's footsteps. His tutors observed that while he excelled in lessons of history and law, his mind often wandered to visions of grandeur, battle, and the applause of the crowd. He loved the theater of Rome, the gladiatorial games that were the heartbeat of the city. To Commodus, the arena was not merely a place of sport, it was a stage where he could become immortal in the eyes of the people. The young prince trained relentlessly, pushing his body beyond normal limits. He wrestled with gladiators, sparred with soldiers, and learned the techniques of combat that few men could master. Each victory fed his ego, each cheer from the gallery stoked a fire in his soul. Marcus Aurelius, aware of his son's growing obsession with spectacle, tried to temper it with lessons in humility. He spoke of emperors who sought glory in the arena, reminding Commodus that Rome needed a ruler, not a performer. But Commodus had a magnetic charm that drew people to him. even as it concealed a growing ruthlessness. Senators, soldiers, and citizens were fascinated by his duality, a learned prince with the strength of a gladiator. Some admired his confidence. Others feared the pride in his eyes, sensing a darkness that even the most careful teachings could not erase. As he matured, Commodus became increasingly impatient with the slow, methodical work of governance. He wanted power immediately. He wanted to be adored immediately, and the restrictions of palace life frustrated him. Nights were spent not in study, but in the quiet plotting of displays that would cement his legacy in a way Marcus Aurelius never could. He began experimenting with cruelty, first in small, controlled ways, testing reactions, understanding the limits of fear. While his father continued to guide him, the young prince's fascination with dominance began to overshadow the wisdom he had been taught. The man who could have been a philosopher-king in the mold of Marcus Aurelius was starting to see himself as a spectacle, a living god, destined not for wisdom but for glory. The city of Rome, ever hungry for spectacle, would soon provide him the stage he craved. But in the shadows, the consequences of unchecked ambition were quietly gathering. By the time Commodus assumed full power, he would not just inherit the empire, he would inherit the potential for its undoing. When Marcus Aurelius passed in 180 AD, Commodus ascended the throne at the age of just 18. The empire expected a ruler molded by philosophy and reason, but what Rome received was a man intoxicated by power and spectacle. Commodus's charm initially won over the people. He appeared approachable, witty, and daring, a stark contrast to the disciplined, solemn reign of his father. But behind the smiles, the first signs of cruelty began to emerge. Commodus soon surrounded himself with flatterers and sycophants who encouraged his worst impulses. He reduced the Senate to a ceremonial body, disregarding the counsels and advice that had once guided the empire. Governors and generals who spoke against him often disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Whispers spread of secret assassinations, poisonings, and executions. Rome was entering a new era, one of fear and theatrical cruelty. The young emperor's obsession with the gladiatorial games became legendary. He declared himself a living Hercules, appearing in the arena dressed as the demigod, wielding swords against both animals and men. Unlike other emperors, who merely watched from the safety of their box seats, Commodus fought openly, eager for the adulation of the crowd. Lions, tigers, and even fellow gladiators fell to his hand, while the populace roared, entranced by the spectacle. Yet, beneath the excitement, there was a dark irony. Commodus, trained to govern wisely, was treating Rome itself like a gladiatorial arena, each senator, general, or rival a potential opponent to be eliminated. Wealth and status meant nothing if it did not enhance his glory or satisfy his ego. Courtiers whispered about the emperor's unpredictable nature, knowing that one wrong word could end their lives. Commodus's cruelty was not limited to politics. It seeped into his personal life as well. He relished humiliating senators, executing rivals for minor slights, and punishing perceived enemies with a theatrical flair. His obsession with control and admiration led him to believe he was above the law, above tradition, and even above mortality itself. The empire that Marcus Aurelius had nurtured with careful wisdom now trembled under the rule of a boy who wielded power like a weapon. The people, at first enchanted by his theatrics, began to notice the instability beneath the spectacle. Commodus's relentless need for adoration and the blood-soaked pageantry of the games created fear in the elite and fascination in the masses. It was clear, Rome's new emperor was not just a ruler, he was a showman, a fighter, and a man whose ambition would soon collide with the very stability of the empire. By the mid-180s AD, Commodus's reign had become synonymous with excess and terror. The emperor no longer merely ruled Rome. He dominated it with a combination of spectacle and fear. Gladiatorial contests were no longer events for public entertainment. Alone, they became political tools. Senators, wealthy merchants, and even prominent citizens were forced to fight in the arena or face public humiliation and death. The line between emperor and entertainer blurred dangerously. Commodus's obsession With his image grew. He insisted on being called Hercules Romanus, and often paraded through the streets in elaborate costumes, carrying clubs and adorned with lion skins. Coins minted with his image celebrated his victories in the arena, rather than his governance. Statues of the emperor replaced revered philosophers, as the man who should have been a servant of Rome now portrayed himself as a god among men. Fear spread quickly among those closest to him. The Senate was powerless to oppose him. Generals hesitated to challenge him, and advisors spoke cautiously, aware that even a private criticism could lead to execution. Commodus's paranoia fed his cruelty. He executed former friends, tested loyalties with deadly games, and relished the terror he inspired. Yet in the crowd, his popularity grew. Many Romans were captivated by his audacity, mistaking theatrical violence for strength. In private, Commodus's rule was lonely. Despite the adoration and fear he commanded, few dared approach him genuinely. Even those he trusted were shadows, reflecting his own desires back at him rather than offering honest counsel. The emperor's mind, once disciplined under the tutelage of Marcus Aurelius, was now consumed by obsession. The arena, the applause, the endless pursuit of glory. As his power expanded unchecked, the empire itself began to suffer. Wars were neglected, administration faltered, and the economy strained under extravagant spending. Commodus's desire to be adored as both emperor and gladiator overshadowed the responsibilities of leadership. Rome was stable in appearance, but rotten at its core, teetering on the brink of chaos. It was only a matter of time before this unstable emperor would meet the fate he had always sought to avoid: the betrayal of those closest to him, the very people he manipulated and feared. The seeds of his downfall were already planted, hidden beneath the gold and blood of the arena, waiting for the right moment to strike. In 192 AD, Commodus's reign came to a violent end. The emperor, consumed by paranoia and indulgence, had alienated almost everyone around him. Senators, praetorians, and even members of his household were wary of his whims and cruelty. The stage was set for betrayal. The conspiracy began within his closest circle. Latus, the commander of the Praetorian Guard, along with other dissatisfied officials, realized that the empire could not survive under Commodus's erratic rule. They plotted to remove him, carefully calculating the moment when the emperor's arrogance would leave him vulnerable. Commodus, ever confident in his invincibility, trusted no one, and yet in his hubris he trusted too many. On a fateful day, Commodus was poisoned, a subtle attempt to end his life without spectacle. But the poison failed, or perhaps it was administered too late. Realizing the danger, Commodus tried to resist, but his guard, Narcissus, a former wrestler of immense strength, strangled him in the emperor's private chamber. Rome had finally been freed from the man who had turned the throne into an arena. The aftermath was chaotic. Commodus's death left no clear heir, and the empire plunged into the year of the 5 emperors, a period of civil war, betrayal, and uncertainty. The city that had once cheered him now struggled to comprehend the gap between the emperor they had feared and the empire he had destabilized. Commodus's obsession with spectacle and power had left Rome fragile, vulnerable to the ambitions of men who would fight ruthlessly to claim the throne. Yet history remembered him vividly. Commodus's life serves as both a cautionary tale and a spectacle itself, a reminder that unchecked ambition and obsession with personal glory can destroy even the mightiest empire. Though the marble halls of Rome would eventually return to order, the memory of the Gladiator Emperor lived on. A boy trained in philosophy who became a man enthralled by power, blood, and the roar of the crowd. Rome survived, but Commodus's legacy was chaos, ambition, and the tragic story of a ruler who forgot that empires are not arenas, and that true power is measured not by spectacle, but by wisdom. Commodus's reign ended in betrayal and blood, but his story did not fade. The boy who could have ruled with wisdom became a symbol of unchecked ambition, cruelty, and spectacle. Rome survived, but the empire he left behind teetered on the edge. of chaos. His life reminds us that power without discipline is a dangerous game, and that even the mightiest can fall when obsession replaces reason. The Gladiator Emperor is gone, but his legacy of fear, spectacle, and ambition will echo through history forever.